Greetings. Welcome to another edition of E3 with Larry Ice, the video series. Today, I wanted to talk about a passage of Scripture that someone asked me about recently, and it's in Matthew chapter 26. I'm just going to read a little bit from verse 39 and following. It says, "He went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And he came to the disciples and found them asleep, and said unto Peter, What, could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray, that you enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And this is the passage about which the question was raised, this idea of the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. What does this mean? So I thought I'd address that today. And when we read things like this, there are a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. First of all, we have to distinguish the difference between what a particular passage in Scripture teaches and what Scripture reports. Sometimes what we read is not something that we're being taught, but rather something that Scripture is reporting to help us have context and understand what was going on. And that's the case with this passage. It's reporting something that happened. The second thing that's important for us to think about is the context and the audience involved. So let's see if we can think through this passage just a little bit more. Here, as I've said, this passage is reporting something that happened. It is not there in and of itself. It is not there to be an instruction for us. It doesn't say something to us about our particular situation at this moment. Jesus is helping the disciples to understand that what's coming is going to be beyond their ability to cope with. He knows that they want to support him. He knows they want to follow him. But he also knows how hard it's going to be and that they will not be able to get through it without stumbling. As a case in point, not long after this, Peter denies Christ 3 times. So he encourages them to pray so that they'll be strengthened. And that's a good idea for all of us, right? We need to be strengthened by his Spirit in our inner being, as Paul puts it, and as he prays for the Ephesians. And praying that God will strengthen us in that way is important and good and very helpful. So while this is something that Scripture reports, that doesn't mean there's nothing we can take from it either. And there is something in this passage that we can glean, some insight that we can get. In our heart, we want to have godly attitudes and actions. But the flesh, sometimes, maybe even often, results in our failure to do that. That happens when the temptation of the worldly way of living by what seems best to our senses draws us away from the godly responses and behaviors we truly want. I'm sure you've seen that in your own life. I know I've seen it in mine. I'll be going along through my day, feeling really good, everything's great. Then something happens and I have a visceral response. Yesterday I spent Christmas with family and extended family, and someone made a comment that I found off-putting. And my first knee-jerk reaction was to be upset about it. And it took me a minute to regather my emotions and say, wait, just because it feels like that's how I should respond, perhaps it would be worth digging into what they meant to understand why they said what they said. And when I did that, an entire new perspective was open to me. And I began to understand that, hey, this isn't something to be upset about. This is just a way of thinking that this person has that's different from my own. And I can have compassion and I can be gentle in the midst of that. So like the disciples, we can and we should pray about such things. We can do that right in the middle of difficulty and even conflict, all we're doing is talking to Father, and He is in us and with us. So the kind of conversation we have with Him doesn't have to be vocal and verbal. We don't have to be on our knees in a closet. We don't have to be, at an altar in a church. We don't have to be in a pew at a church. We don't have to be kneeling beside our bed. We can just talk with Him in our spirit, talk with Him in our mind throughout the day and in the middle of these difficult times. And so talking with Him about our struggles and the temptation that we face, and asking that He strengthen us by His Spirit in our inner being, brings our minds to the right place so that we can withstand temptation. And I'll tell you, there's not much that's more gratifying than coming out on the other side of temptation going, we did it. Jesus and I did it. It also gives us the strength of knowing that even if we do fall to the temptation, we still remain His righteous children, and we can still boldly approach the throne of grace. I recently posted online something about that concept that, we don't need to be fearful or worried that somehow we have to do penance and we have to be angry with ourselves and feel guilt and remorse and curl up in a little ball and not talk to God because somehow we've violated our relationship with Him because we fall to temptation. Not at all. In fact, the inverse is true. The opposite is true. We should run to Him even more. We should talk with Him even more, because that's what brings us up out of that depth of despair and the accusations that the enemy likes to whisper in our ear about, hey, you did a terrible job. What kind of Christian are you? What kind of a believer are you? You're not a child of God at all. You messed up. And he's right. We did mess up. And so his accusation is a little bit of truth wrapped up in a big lie. And that big lie is, God's upset with me. Father is angry about this. I've hurt the relationship, and He's turned His face from me, and I can't expect blessing anymore, and now I'll be cursed, or there'll be this problem, or this illness that I feel is from Him to teach me a lesson. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's not how He operates. You never see Jesus, when He was walking on the earth, go around and say, here, have a little sickness. That kind of thing isn't from Him. So, just to recap, what we really are looking at here in this passage where it says the flesh is willing, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, is the Bible reporting what Jesus said to the disciples in that context. And what we can take from it, while it's not directly teaching us, what we can take from it is that we too can benefit from praying about issues when we want to do the right thing, we want to think the right things, we want to have the right attitudes, but we don't feel like it in the moment. And we're stressed out, and we're upset. And we can ask for Him to strengthen us so that we can withstand against those temptations. This has to do with that way of escape that He made for when temptations come to us. We can turn to Him. We can rest in His finished work, and we can be secure knowing that He is on our side, working for good, and that when we ask for help, He's there for us. Thanks. I hope you really enjoyed this session, and I look forward to speaking with you again before too long. Bye.